Look at the waitress. She looks like she came straight out of a roadside diner. Laughter echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers, between imported flower arrangements and tables draped in silk cloths. It was the most talked about wedding of the year, the union of two billionaire families, and yet, the center of attention was not the bride, but the young woman in a simple uniform walking among the guests with a tray of glasses. Camila. The collar already frayed, the black fabric slightly faded, yet her posture remained straight, her gaze steady and calm. For a moment, it seemed as though the insult slid right past her without leaving a mark. Anyone who looked deeply enough could sense it. There was something in her eyes that had nothing to do with submission, but with a quiet power, almost threatening. As if this waitress had the strength to alter the fate of fortunes at stake. Seriously, they let someone like that walk among us, added a man in a flawless suit, raising his glass to emphasize the sarcasm. A Swiss watch gleamed on his wrist. She doesn't even know how to hold a glass properly. The laughter spread like an electric current, fueled by the cruel delight of the crowd. Camila didn't react. She kept serving, balancing the tray with practiced skill, as if she had long since learned how to breathe silently in the middle of a storm. From the improvised altar in the center of the hall, the bride watched. Dressed in French silk, her neck adorned with family diamonds, she still couldn't hide the unease in her eyes. She had grown up between elite boarding schools and gala dinners, trained to smile without ever showing weakness. But seeing that young woman reduced to mockery stirred a bitter memory. She too had once been laughed at, for speaking too softly, for not being arrogant enough for the world she was born into. Perhaps that was why, with every insult thrown at Camila, she felt a weight pressing on her chest. The groom, on the other hand, remained composed, as if nothing had happened. Heir to a conglomerate of hotels and resorts, he carried the air of someone who had always had the world at his feet. His rehearsed smile never faded, his hands adjusted the golden cufflinks, his eyes looked away whenever the scene became too uncomfortable. He would not defend her. Not that night, not in front of the gazes of his family and the investors waiting for the $1 million contract to be sealed. His cowardice spoke louder than any word. Camila approached a table where four ladies of old society spoke in low tones, but laughed loudly enough for everyone to hear. One of them lifted her chin and fired. "Waitress, did you buy that uniform at a thrift store? It looks more like a dish rag than work clothes." The cackling burst out. Camila placed a glass in front of her with slow, steady movements and replied in a quiet but audible tone. "Clothes don't change the taste of the wine." A brief silence spread before the laughter resumed. Some guests coughed, others pretended not to hear. But the remark had hit its mark. It wasn't submission, it was calmness. A young man with slick-back hair and a smug grin seized the pause to launch the next attack. "Do you even know how to use the cutlery on the table? Or do you need private lessons?" He lifted a fork as if it were a trophy. More laughter. Camila set her tray down on a nearby surface, picked up a salad fork, twirled it between her fingers with ease, and placed it back. "I know enough not to embarrass myself." A flush of red rose to the young man's face, choking off his laugh. But before the tension could grow, another female voice rang out. A guest in a red dress, heavy makeup painted across her features, leaned toward her friend and said loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's why certain people should never be invited to parties like this. They ruin the scenery." This time, Camila didn't respond. She simply adjusted her tray and walked away with firm steps. Her silence cut deeper than any word could. The groom's mother, a woman of erect posture and calculated smile, advanced like a judge before a defendant. Her emerald green dress shimmered, each step accompanied by the sparkle of jewels on her arms. "Darling, you should hide behind the curtains. You're ruining the beauty of this party." The laughter returned, crueler, louder. Camila set the tray down on the nearest table, tilted her head slightly, not in submission, but in quiet firmness, and said, "Perhaps beauty lies in the eyes of those who know how to see." A brief silence sliced through the hall. For a moment, even the sound of violins felt distant. But soon the murmurs returned, trying to cover the unease that had begun to spread. What no one there could imagine was that this quiet young woman, the target of cheap laughter, would still play a role that would change the course of that night. The entire ballroom was a showcase of wealth, marble columns, Persian rugs, arrangements exuding an overly sweet perfume. It was a place built for the powerful to recognize themselves in one another. And yet, in the midst of it all, the figure of a waitress had become the central target, as if she were a daring intruder. What they didn't realize, not yet, was that this very intruder carried the spark capable of altering the fate of the evening. The laughter grew louder and louder, fueled by champagne that flowed endlessly and by the arrogance gleaming in every glance. It was no longer about celebrating the union of two families, but about staging a silent display of power. And as every show needs a target, the guests had found in Camila, the waitress in a plain uniform, the perfect victim. "Careful, young lady," said a gray-haired businessman, lifting his glass for all to see. "This champagne costs more than your rent for a year. If you spill it, you'll have to work until you die to pay it off." The laughter burst like fireworks. Camila kept the tray steady, her eyes lowered for just a second before lifting her head again. Her silence, once more, seemed to irritate her attackers even more. At the main table, the groom Adrian Whitmore, heir to an international resort empire, observed the scene with a half-smile. His tailored suit, his movie star face, everything about him exuded the confidence of someone who had always been the center of attention. But instead of ending the provocations, he fed them with subtle gestures, approving looks, and even discreet chuckles. His cowardice did not lie in silence, but in joining, with refinement, the collective cruelty. The bride, beside him, tried to keep her composure. Her lips still curved into a delicate smile, out of courtesy, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort. Raised under strict social protocols, she had learned never to oppose the game of appearances. Even so, each new laugh at Camila's expense sounded like an unbearable dissonance. One of Adrian's friends, his cheeks already flushed with drink, stood and shouted, "I bet this girl has never stepped into a real restaurant. She must be lost among all these forks." He raised a fork as if it were a trophy. The laughter was instant. Adrian smiled, pleased, and remarked loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "If she wants, I could give her some lessons. It's always good to train those still learning." The group erupted in roars. The weight of the mockery fell entirely upon Camila. The waitress set the tray on the nearest table, picked up a salad fork, and calmly twirled it between her fingers. Then, with a faint metallic clink, she set it back in place. "I know enough not to embarrass myself," she said in a firm, steady voice, though low. The young man flushed crimson and tried to mask it with a nervous laugh. But Adrian, noticing his hesitation, leaned toward his friend and added, "See? Even she knows how to play. It's really not that hard." The cruelty, now turned into a ballroom spectacle, seemed to renew itself with every phrase. A socialite in a red dress, known for collecting followers on social media, raised her phone as if to film. "I'll post, even the waiters at the wedding of the year try to look fancy." Her alcohol-slurred voice drew mocking applause. "Excellent!" Adrian exclaimed, clapping softly. "Let the world know our party has diversity." The remark, dripping with irony, was met with even louder laughter. Camila, however, showed no reaction. She adjusted the tray against her body and continued her path between the tables. Each step measured, each gesture controlled. Her silence, in that noisy environment, was almost an invisible scream. Adrian's mother, elegant in a dark blue gown studded with gems, stepped forward, seizing the momentum of the mockery. "Don't give her too much attention," she said, her tone laced with false pity. "This poor girl must be dazzled just to see so much beauty and wealth up close. For her, being here is already a privilege." The laughter resumed, as if cruelty itself were the true entertainment of the night. The bride averted her eyes, staring at the flower arrangement in front of her. She remembered being a girl in elite schools, mocked for not having the arrogance they expected of her. In Camila's silence, she recognized a kind of dignity that no one else in that ballroom seemed to understand. A middle-aged lawyer, leaning against one of the marble columns, swirled his glass of whiskey and raised his voice. "Tell me, girl, what have you brought to this party besides trays?" "Certainly not elegance." More laughter. Camilla tilted her head slightly, unhurried, and replied, "I brought what many here have forgotten, work." The laughter faltered halfway. Some guests coughed, others looked away. But Adrian broke the silence by forcing a laugh and lifting his glass. "Look at that, she even knows how to improvise. We've got a comedian among us." The mockery returned with even greater force, sustained by the millionaire's approval. Camilla, however, did not yield. Her steps remained steady, her gaze unwavering. The ballroom could laugh, but she would not bow. The weight of her silence was beginning to unsettle them, though no one dared to admit it. The violins kept playing, trying to fill the void between bursts of laughter. But the real sound echoing that night was not the music, it was arrogance, parading as entertainment before a waitress who, without saying much, was already challenging the very heart of the celebration. And though no one knew it yet, every insult hurled at her was more than a wound. It was fuel for a turning point that would change the fate of everyone in that ballroom. The laughter had already become a habit that night, a background noise as constant as the clinking of glasses and the distant sound of violins. Camilla, still firm in her silence, kept serving champagne flutes and plates of appetizers, each step seeming to spark a new wave of sarcasm among the guests. Adrian Whitmore, the groom, watched the scene from his main table. Heir to a fortune spanning hotels, resorts, and real estate ventures, he was the perfect picture of shallow charm, tall, handsome, his trained smile that had opened countless doors. But that night, his smile became an accomplice to cruelty. A guest, drunk on too much wine, raised his glass toward Adrian and shouted, "Adrian, you should give this waitress a bigger tip. She's been working hard to entertain us all." The laughter followed instantly. The comment itself wasn't funny, the amusement came from the humiliation, from the pleasure of reducing someone to ridicule. Adrian, instead of scolding his friend or ignoring the remark, simply lifted his glass in response and smiled, as if endorsing the joke. The bride, seated beside him, kept her lips half-curved in a polite smile, masking the tension. Her heart raced. Every time she saw Camilla turned into a punchline, a bitter memory surfaced, the years when she too had been the target of laughs disguised as jokes at high society gatherings. She knew the taste of that humiliation. Camilla stopped before a table where two young men chatted animatedly. One of them, eager to draw attention, spoke loudly enough to be heard around. "Look at this, it feels like the party got livelier once we discovered this new entertainment." The other replied mockingly, "We should ask her to make a toast, don't you think? Imagine the waitress giving a speech at the wedding of the year." The laughter echoed once more, rippling through the hall. Adrian, watching from afar, chuckled discreetly, shaking his head as though in approval. He said nothing to end the cruelty. There wasn't a trace of discomfort in him, on the contrary, he seemed at ease watching the waitress become the collective target. The bride turned her gaze away, fixing it on the white flower arrangement before her. The diamonds on her neck sparkled under the lights, but to her, the ballroom felt increasingly suffocating. She longed to intervene, but social conventions tied her tongue. A gesture of reproach could be seen as rudeness toward her own guests. And above all, there was the weight of expectation. Her family demanded nothing from her but smiles and silence. Camilla, though the target of every joke, continued her work. Her face serene, her steps measured, her eyes unshaken. There was in her a strength that stood in stark contrast to the superficiality surrounding her. Each time she refused to react to the provocations, she seemed to grow taller in the attentive eyes of the bride even if no one else noticed. One of Adrian's uncles, a pompous businessman, decided to add to the string of insults. "My nephew has always been generous. Even here, he gives a job to someone who would never belong at a party like this." Adrian smiled in response, acknowledging the compliment with a nod. His complicity was evident. There was no embarrassment in him, only the coldness of a man who believed it was all part of the show. The bride cast a quick glance at her future husband, hoping to see some sign of discomfort, perhaps a spark of empathy. But she found only the same distant smile, the same look of satisfied superiority. To his eyes, humiliation was not just acceptable, it was inevitable. Camilla approached the main table. She set down 2 glasses of champagne before the couple. Her hands were steady, but her gaze brief, yet undeniable, met the bride's. In that silent moment, the bride felt something stir inside her, a mixture of shame and admiration. Shame for not having the courage to act, admiration for the firmness of this young woman who, surrounded by scorn, remained upright, refusing to surrender to despair. Adrian, noticing the glance, hurried to make a remark loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I trust the service is up to the occasion. We wouldn't want anyone to say this night was marked by failures." The phrase, seemingly harmless, was enough to spark more laughter. The guests knew well who the hidden target was, the waitress. Camilla did not respond. She simply stepped back calmly, pressing the tray to her body, as though each insult were absorbed and stored in silence. The bride kept her fragile smile, but inside, the discomfort had become unbearable. The man she had married, who was supposed to be her protector, her partner, proved incapable of defending even the dignity of a stranger. If he would not stand up now, when the injustice was so blatant, would he ever stand up for her? The ballroom remained filled with laughter, but the bride no longer heard it the same way. Each burst of laughter echoed deeper, revealing a harsh truth: Adrian's charm was nothing more than veneer. Beneath it lay only indifference. Camilla, silent, continued her path. She was not supposed to be the center of the evening, but she had become it. The guests, without realizing it, had turned her into the preferred target of their arrogance. And in mocking her, they revealed far more about themselves than about the young woman they insisted on ridiculing. The bride sat still, unmoving. The smile on her face was only a mask, while inside her grew the certainty that silence, her own, Camilla's, and the millionaire's complicit silence beside her, would forever change the course of that night. But how long could the bride endure the cowardly silence of the man who had vowed to protect her before all? The ballroom grew noisier by the minute. The loud laughter mingled with the elegant music, creating an atmosphere that, to outside eyes, might be described as perfect. But beneath the glittering lights and the warmth of the crystal chandeliers, invisible cracks were forming. Camilla moved among the tables with the same composure as always, though she remained the involuntary target of jokes. Her upright posture and her silence seemed to irritate some guests even more, who expected her to break. The fact that she did not yield turned every burst of laughter into a frustrated attempt to force her downfall. It was in this atmosphere that the bride's eyes, Isabella's eyes, fixed on her. Until then, Isabella had remained quiet, smiling as expected, holding the facade of the happy and proud wife at Adrian's side. But inside, she was unraveling. Her heart pounded. The taunts against the waitress were like a mirror of her own life, the same arrogance she had witnessed for years among the elite that surrounded her. But unlike Camilla, she had learned to stay silent to survive. When Camilla passed discreetly by the main table, Isabella took a deep breath and leaned forward, calling out in a low but firm voice, "Could you come here for a moment?" The young woman stopped, surprised. It was unusual for a bride to address a waitress directly in the middle of the celebration, especially with the entire crowd watching the couple's every move. For a second, she hesitated, but soon she stepped closer. Isabella looked around, making sure no one was paying attention. Then she pulled a small white silk handkerchief from her hands, part of the delicate set she had carried since the beginning of the ceremony. She placed it discreetly on the tray Camilla was holding. "Keep this for me, please," she said in a near whisper, but with an unexpected tone of trust. Camilla, not fully understanding, nodded. The gesture was simple, yet it carried something enigmatic. Isabella could not have asked any other waiter, much less someone from her family or the guests. But she had chosen her. There was a brief exchange of glances. Isabella stared at Camilla with an intensity that could not go unnoticed. It was as if, in that instant, she were saying without words, "I trust you," even without explanation. Adrian, beside her, noticed the movement. Curious, he raised an eyebrow and asked in an ironic tone, just loud enough for Isabella to hear. "Already found a trusted friend among the staff?" The bride forced a smile and replied, "Perhaps it's easier to trust someone who has nothing to gain." The groom chuckled quietly, shaking his head as if amused by her naivety. He didn't press further, but the remark lingered in the air. Meanwhile, Camilla tucked the folded handkerchief into a discreet pocket of her apron. No one noticed, except Isabella. To the guests, it was just another waitress serving champagne. But for the bride, that gesture was the first sign that she was not completely alone that night. A few minutes later, Isabella rose to greet some relatives. On the way, her eyes met Camilla's once again, steady in her work. It was quick, but enough to create an invisible bridge between them. The guests, too absorbed in their loud conversations, noticed nothing unusual. To them, Camilla was still just a secondary presence, a convenient distraction for tasteless jokes. But for Isabella, every second the waitress held that handkerchief seemed to carry greater meaning, even if she herself could not fully explain it. The trust she placed in the young woman was inexplicable even to her. There was something about Camilla, perhaps her quiet dignity, perhaps the way she endured each attack without bowing, that made her seem unlike anyone else in the room. Later, when Isabella returned to her seat beside the groom, Adrian commented with a cold smile. "It's curious how some people know how to put themselves at the center of attention when they shouldn't." "Maybe it's not her who seeks the attention," Isabella retorted, without lifting her eyes. The silence between them stretched. Adrian understood the message, but chose not to respond. Meanwhile, Camilla moved through the hall with the tray in her hands, the small silk handkerchief tucked away like a secret. To her, the gesture still had no explanation, but she knew that, somehow, she was tied to something greater that night. And the audience, without realizing it, had just received the first clue: there was more to this waitress than anyone could imagine. But would this night end as everyone expected, with a happy ending wrapped in luxury and celebration? Or would the hidden truth change the course of this party forever? The laughter still echoed when the bride rose to her feet. The hall, lit by crystal chandeliers and decorated with imported flowers, seemed to freeze the moment everyone noticed she was asking for the floor. There was no smile on her face. Only a grave calm, almost cutting. She took a deep breath, holding the microphone firmly. Her voice, when it came, was not that of someone making a toast, but of someone bearing witness. Tonight was supposed to be about love. About union. About celebrating the hope of a shared life. But little by little, what was meant to be a celebration has turned into something else. People exchanged uneasy glances. Some laughed nervously, others leaned back in their chairs, trying to maintain an air of superiority. "What I saw here," she continued, "was not the lightness of love. It was arrogance. It was presumption. It was a sad spectacle of how many prefer to laugh at what they judge to be small, instead of recognizing the human value standing right before them." The bride paused. It was as though each word was being weighed, measured, delivered with precision. She looked around, meeting anxious, disguised, even irritated eyes. But she did not falter. This should have been the night when happiness was shared, when vows of love echoed louder than any contract or fortune. But what I saw was different. I saw people use a wedding to feed their vanity. I saw eyes judging, mouths wounding, and laughter, oh, the laughter, used as a weapon against someone who was only doing her job. She drew a deep breath, as if searching for courage within her own heart. I saw the cruelty with which you treated a young woman who was only doing her duty. A waitress. I saw the jokes, the whispers, the muffled laughter. And what hurt me the most was seeing that the man with whom I was supposed to share my life did not say a word. Not a gesture. Not even a glance of compassion. Only the same indifference that fed the laughter of others. The groom shifted uneasily in his chair. But the bride did not waver. Her voice now trembled, but every syllable carried truth. That indifference hurt me more than all the insults. Because it revealed an invisible pact. A silent pact with arrogance, with pride. And if that is the pact that sustains this marriage, then it is already dead. The entire hall stirred. Some ladies raised their hands to their mouths, gentlemen cleared their throats to cover their discomfort. But the bride had not yet reached her deepest point. She breathed deeply, and her eyes turned to Camilla, who stood motionless, tray in hand, as sober as a silent witness to the spectacle. I must tell you something. Years ago, I was not surrounded by luxury. There were no expensive dresses, no parties, no promises of million-dollar contracts. There was only pain. I was ill, fragile, and alone. At that time, no one cared. No one reached out a hand. But one person, who had nothing to gain, who didn't even know who I was, took care of me. The audience shifted restlessly. Some frowned, others whispered, trying to guess the direction of her confession. It was Camilla. A waitress, as you have called her so many times tonight. She brought me food when I had no strength. She sat by my side when everyone else walked away. We weren't friends. She knew nothing about me. She didn't know I was wealthy. She expected nothing in return. She was simply human. And in that humanity, she restored my hope. The hall fell completely silent. Even the most arrogant seemed smaller before that memory. Tonight, fate brought us together again. And hearing you humiliate her is as if you spat upon that part of my life that only I know the pain it carried. And I cannot accept it. I cannot pretend I didn't see it. I cannot call family those who trample on the dignity of someone who has more character than all who laughed here together. She paused, then raised her voice, clear as the toll of a bell. That is why, before everyone, I say, if this marriage is conditioned on ignoring what I saw and betraying the gratitude I carry, then this $750 million contract has no value whatsoever. I would rather lose everything than lose myself. For several moments after the bride's speech, no one dared move. The silence was not of respect, but of disbelief. Each word still hung in the air, as though etched into the stained glass, the marble columns, the flawless linen tablecloths. Then, the whispers began. A middle-aged man, heavy-set with gold rings on each finger, leaned toward the guest beside him. His voice came out in a whisper, but laced with venom. This is madness. She has ruined herself. The neighbor, a banker in a gray suit, replied in a low tone, though with less conviction. Or perhaps, she is showing that she has more power than we ever imagined. An elegant lady, hair pulled into a bun and dressed in navy, fanned herself with a mother-of-pearl fan, trying to hide her discomfort. She murmured to her friends. I always suspected this family would go too far. All they knew was to flaunt their wealth and despise others. Her friends, who only minutes before had laughed at the jokes about the waitress, merely nodded, as if trying to erase their own complicity. On the other side of the hall, a young executive, already half-drunk, let out a nervous laugh. It's just theater, nothing will come of it. Nobody cancels $750 million over a waitress. But his companion, a socialite with a pearl necklace, did not laugh. Her eyes were fixed on the bride, as though she saw something he could not. It's not about the waitress, it's about her. Don't you see? She's not afraid. The murmurs grew, spreading like fire through dry straw. Each group interpreted the event differently, some thought it madness, others feared there was something greater behind it. Camilla, still with the tray in her hands, bent discreetly to pick up a glass someone had dropped on the floor. Her movements were silent, yet there was dignity in every gesture. The scene went unnoticed by most, but for a few attentive eyes, that simple act carried symbolic weight. While the powerful drowned in their pride, it was she, the invisible one, who maintained the minimal order of the night. The tension was rising. Some guests, unable to endure the unbearable atmosphere, began to leave. Not abruptly, no one wanted to be the first to show fear. But chairs were being pulled, purses gathered, eyes averted. The exodus had begun in silence. At the center of it all, the bride remained firm, gripping the microphone with tense hands, her gaze unwavering. She knew her words had opened a fracture that could not be repaired. Her words had fallen like a sentence. Glasses trembled, eyes darted away, and even the most arrogant shrank into silence. But would the bride's courage to defy her own family and reject unimaginable fortune be enough to change the course of this night? Or had she just ignited a war impossible to contain? The silence that followed was deafening. It was as if the world had stopped. Even the musicians, who had once filled the hall with soft melodies, stood frozen, not daring to play another note. The groom was pale as marble. His eyes wandered, searching for support, but finding only judging stares. He knew that in a matter of minutes his image of a powerful heir, of a promising man, had shattered. His mother was the first to react. She rose in fury, her dark green dress swirling around her. "You cannot be serious," she shouted, her shrill voice echoing against the gilded walls. "Do you have any idea what it means to cancel this contract?" Some guests stepped back at the scene, as if they didn't want to be struck by the shrapnel of that scandal. The patriarch rose next, his face red with rage and despair. "That contract is the heart of our business. Without it, all our investors will leave. You have ruined us." The lawyer, seated further back, tried to compose himself. He wiped his sweaty face and muttered, "We can renegotiate, we can find a way out." But no one seemed to believe his own words. Meanwhile, the guests, once faithful flatterers, began to move. At first discreetly, a lady excused herself to use the restroom and never returned. A businessman answered a non-existent phone call and slipped out through the side of the hall. Soon, others followed their example. Chairs scraped, footsteps echoed, and the elegant crowd that only minutes earlier had delighted in the celebration now dispersed like sand slipping through fingers. "We must leave," whispered a magnate to his wife. "If we stay, we'll be associated with their downfall." In moments, the hall seemed transformed, empty, heavy, consumed by fear. Those who remained did not stay out of loyalty, but out of morbid curiosity, as if watching a castle collapse. The ballroom no longer carried the same atmosphere of festivity. The expensive perfume of the flowers, the clinking of crystal glasses, even the soft music that once filled the air, all of it now felt displaced, belonging to another time, another place. The present was nothing but silence, tension, and fear. The groom, still stunned, tried to react. He rose, his face pale, his voice faltering. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's nervous, that's all." But the words sounded weak, empty. A murmur of disapproval rippled through the hall. Some guests laughed nervously, others turned away, unable to face the fragility of the man who had always presented himself as an unshakable heir. His mother, desperate, clutched his arm. "Don't just stand there. Do something. Deny it." Her voice was loud, almost hysterical, drawing even sharper looks. The father, sweating, scrambled to explain to those who remained. "It's just a misunderstanding. You know the business is still solid. The contract is secure." But as he spoke, the phone of one guest buzzed on the table. He picked it up and widened his eyes. "No, it can't be," he murmured, before showing the screen to his wife. It was breaking news already circulating: scandal at wedding, bride breaks $750 million deal with heirs. The news spread like wildfire. Other phones buzzed. Faces changed one by one. What had once been doubt was now certainty. The empire was collapsing before everyone's eyes. "It's everywhere already," murmured an elderly lady, her voice trembling as she adjusted the necklace on her neck. "In minutes, this will reach the international press." The groom ran a hand through his hair, distraught. His arrogance had vanished. All that remained was the shadow of a small man, lost in his own pride. Some guests began to physically distance themselves from the family, as if afraid of being contaminated by the collapse. A young influencer, who had until then smiled beside the groom's mother, suddenly stood and said dryly, "Mom, we need to leave. Now." And they walked out, without saying goodbye. The family's lawyer, usually confident, tried to articulate something, but his voice no longer carried authority. "We can adjust, there are clauses, there are resources," but he was speaking more to himself than to anyone else. The groom's mother began to cry, sinking into her chair, fanning herself desperately. "This will ruin us, it will ruin everything." The father, once so imposing, now seemed diminished. His shoulders slumped, his breathing heavy, as though he carried centuries of defeat. He stared at the table before him in silence, the silence of a man watching the abyss open beneath his feet. Meanwhile, Camila remained in the background. Her eyes observed, but without glee. There was no satisfaction in witnessing the fall of those who had mocked her. Only a serene understanding. Power, when used to crush others, never lasts. The bride, standing firm beside her, understood the same. It wasn't just a contract that had broken. It was an entire farce that had collapsed. But would this downfall be the family's final end, or merely the beginning of an even crueler war for vengeance and survival? In the midst of all the chaos, Camila remained calm. Her heart beat steadily, but her face stayed serene. She had spoken hardly a word that night, yet her dignity had shouted louder than all the arrogant voices that had tried to silence her. While everyone else scrambled to salvage their reputations, she simply held the tray, took a deep breath, and walked slowly toward the exit. She didn't need to run. She didn't need to hide. Her victory did not lie in humiliating them in return, but in proving that no one could strip her of the honor of being who she was. The bride followed her. Her white gown still shimmered, but now it seemed more than a festive garment, it was a symbol. A symbol of the courage of someone who had chosen truth over fortune, loyalty over appearances. When their eyes met, no words were necessary. Camila's gaze said, "Thank you for not forgetting. Thank you for showing that kindness, even in silence, can change destinies." And the bride's gaze answered, "I only did what the heart demanded. Because a gesture like yours cannot be erased. And today, before everyone, I had to give back the respect the world tried to steal from you." It was a wordless dialogue, yet full of complicity. An unlikely bond, born years ago in a moment of pain and need, sealed now in the face of exposed arrogance. Inside, the bride felt the serenity of a mission fulfilled. She had lost wealth, prestige, perhaps even the future she had imagined beside a millionaire. But she had gained something infinitely greater, the certainty that one's conscience is not for sale. And so, together, they walked out of the ballroom. One as the witness of the silent strength of the humble. The other as the example of courage in facing everyone to defend the truth. What was left behind was not just a broken contract, but a lesson carved forever. Sometimes, it is not fortune that decides someone's worth, but the courage to choose the truth. And you? If you had been in that room, would you have had the courage to rise against injustice? Write the word truth in the comments to show that you too believe character is worth more than any fortune.